After a really tough week dealing with problems back in the city, I decided to take a break at my country house upstate. I needed silence, fresh air, the peace that only that place could give me. As I pulled up to the property gate, I saw something I never in my life imagined seeing. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, was loading up all the furniture from the house. My son, Robert, was putting every single item into the moving van. The sofa I bought with my first decent paycheck, the lamps I chose with so much care, the table where we had shared so many meals together. Everything was being taken as if none of it belonged to me. I never expected such treachery and audacity from them. In my 68 years of life, I had seen a lot of things, been through hard times, faced losses and disappointments. But this was different. This was coming from my own flesh and blood, from the son I raised with my own hands. I stood there by the gate, watching the scene. Robert was lifting a heavy box and stacking it in the back of the van. Sarah was walking in and out of the house as if she owned the place. Neither of them had seen me yet. They were so focused on their task, so sure of what they were doing, that they didn't notice my presence. Without making a scene right then and there, I calmly took my phone out of my purse. My hands were trembling a little, but I managed to hold it steady. Before saying anything, before confronting them, I needed to have proof of what I was seeing. I started recording everything in silence. The truck was large, one of those used for complete house moves. It was already half full with my belongings. I saw my chairs, my paintings, even the curtains I sewed myself years ago. Every object that left that house represented years of effort, of honest work, of sacrifice. Robert paused for a moment to wipe the sweat from his forehead. He was 42 years old, a strong and capable man. I had raised him alone after his father abandoned us when he was just 5 years old. I worked cleaning other people's homes. I did laundry, scrubbed floors, did everything necessary so he wouldn't lack anything. Sarah came out again with a box in her arms. She was 38 and always seemed like a calculated woman, cold in a certain way. But I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt because she was my son's wife, the mother of my grandchildren. Now I saw her with different eyes, collaborating in this blatant theft. I kept recording everything from my spot by the gate. The country house was located in a quiet area upstate, surrounded by trees with neighbors a ways off. It was my sanctuary, the place I bought with the savings from a lifetime of hard work. Every single dollar I invested in this property came from my sweat, my tired hands, my aching knees. My mind started working quickly despite the shock. I needed to understand what was really happening. Did they think I wouldn't show up? Did they believe they could take everything without consequences? How long had they been planning this? Robert went back inside the house. I heard his voice from inside, talking to Sarah about what items were left to load. They spoke naturally, with no apparent remorse. To them, this was just another chore, a plan they were executing efficiently. I remembered the last time I talked to Robert on the phone, just 3 days ago. He asked how I was, if I needed anything, if the problems I was having in the city had been resolved. He sounded worried, attentive, like a caring son. Now I understood that those questions had another purpose. He wanted to know when I would be away. How much time would he have to do this? Sarah appeared with more items. This time she was carrying my framed photographs, the ones that held memories of my whole life. The photo of my mother, who died 10 years ago. The photo of Robert as a child, smiling in his first day of school outfit. The photo of my late husband, taken months before he left us. I felt a deep pain in my chest, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to cry, not yet. I needed to be strong. I needed to think clearly. I put the phone back in my purse after I had enough video evidence. I took a deep breath and started walking toward them. My steps on the dirt path were soft. The afternoon sun created long shadows across the ground. In the distance, I could hear birds singing, oblivious to the human drama unfolding at that moment. Nature continued its course while my world crumbled. When I was just a few feet from the truck, Robert finally saw me. His expression changed instantly. Surprise appeared on his face, quickly followed by something that looked like fear or guilt. He dropped the box he was carrying. The sound of the impact made Sarah rush out of the house. She saw me too and froze in the doorway. Neither of them said anything for several seconds. I stared at them intently, a gaze that held 68 years of experience, of overcome disappointments, of accumulated strength. Robert was the first to try to speak. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out easily. I raised my hand, asking for silence. It wasn't time yet to listen to their excuses or their lies. First, I needed to fully process what I was seeing, what all this meant. I walked slowly towards the moving van and looked inside. Everything was there. My entire life packed up like merchandise someone could just take away. The furniture I chose so carefully, the objects that had accompanied me for years, the things that gave me comfort in my old age. Sarah took a step forward and started saying something about helping, about organizing, about doing me a favor. Her voice sounded nervous, artificial. I interrupted her with a single word that came firmly from my lips. Stop. Just that. Stop. Robert tried to get closer to me. I saw an attempt at manipulation in his eyes, that expression he used since he was a child when he was caught doing something wrong. But I was no longer the mother who gave in to every excuse. The years had taught me to recognize a lie, to detect betrayal even when it was wrapped in sweet words. I told him not to move, to stay exactly where he was. My voice sounded harder than I expected, firmer. It was the voice of a woman who had been pushed too far, who had trusted too much and was now facing the consequences of that blind trust. To understand how I got to that horrible moment in front of my own house, watching my son rob me, I need to go back in time. I need to tell you what my life was like, how I built everything they were trying to take, how I came to own that country house that represented the fruit of decades of sacrifice. I was born in a small town, in a humble family that barely had enough to eat. From a young age, I learned that nothing in this life is given for free, that everything is achieved with work and effort. My mother did laundry for others to support us, and my father worked the fields from sunup to sundown. When I turned 18, I met John Smith. He was a hard-working, honest man, with dreams of getting ahead in life. We married young, full of excitement and plans for the future. He got temporary construction jobs, and I cleaned houses. We put together every dollar we could save. Robert was born when I was 26. It was the happiest day of my life. I remember it perfectly, wrapped in a blue blanket that a neighbor gave me. His small eyes looked at me with that innocence newborns have. At that moment, I swore I would do everything possible to give him a better life than the one I had. John was happy too. He worked longer hours, accepted any extra job so we wouldn't lack anything. The first years were difficult but beautiful. We lived in a small apartment we rented, but it was our home. Every night we ate dinner together, talked about our dreams, and planned for the future. When Robert was 5 years old, everything changed. John told me one morning that he had met another woman. Just like that, without preamble, without preparation. He told me he was leaving, that he no longer felt the same way about me, that he needed to start over. He left that same afternoon, taking only a suitcase with his clothes. I was left alone with a small child, with no money saved because John had taken everything we had in the bank account. That night I cried until I ran out of tears, but when morning came, I got up and moved forward. I had no other option. Robert needed me. I found a job cleaning offices at night. During the day, I took care of Robert and did sewing work that the neighbours commissioned. I slept 3 or 4 hours every night, but I never let my son go without. He always had food on the table, clean clothes, and school supplies. The years passed and Robert grew up. He was an intelligent, curious, and affectionate child towards me. I worked tirelessly to pay for a good education for him. I wanted him to study, to have opportunities I never had, so he wouldn't have to clean other people's floors to survive. When Robert turned 15, I got a better job at a cleaning company that paid more. I started saving money with discipline. Every dollar I had left over after paying rent and food went into a special account. I had a dream to buy my own property, a place no one could take from us. Robert finished high school with good grades. I was so proud of him. He entered college to study business administration. He worked part-time at a store while studying, but I kept helping him with what I could. I paid for part of his tuition, bought him books, and made sure he didn't lack anything. During those years, he met Sarah. She studied at the same university. She came from a family with more economic resources than ours. At first, she seemed like a polite girl, although I always noticed a certain distance in how she treated me. But my son was in love, and I wanted his happiness. They got married when Robert was 25 years old. I organized a modest party with the money I had saved for my property. I didn't mind using those savings because I wanted my son to have a good memory of his wedding. Sarah complained that the celebration was too simple, but Robert seemed content. They continued living in an apartment they rented. I kept working hard, saving every dollar possible again. By then, I was 50 years old, and my body was starting to feel the toll of so much effort. My knees ached, my back protested every morning, but I didn't give up. When I was 55 years old, I finally achieved my dream. I found the country house upstate, a few hours from the city. It was a beautiful place, surrounded by trees, fresh air, and silence. The house needed repairs, but the price was within what I had saved over so many years. I used all my savings for the down payment and took out a loan for the rest. For the next few years, I worked tirelessly to pay off that loan. Sometimes I did extra jobs on weekends, sacrificing my own needs to avoid falling behind on the monthly payments. Little by little, I furnished the country house. Every piece of furniture I bought was chosen carefully, thinking about comfort and durability. I couldn't afford to buy expensive things, but I looked for good quality objects that would last me for many years. Robert and Sarah visited me occasionally. He seemed happy that I had my own place. Sarah made comments about how simple everything was, but I didn't pay attention to her. For me, that country house represented the culmination of decades of effort, the reward for never giving up. When I turned 60, I finished paying off the loan. That day, I cried with happiness. The country house was completely mine, free of debt, without a mortgage. No one could take it from me. Or so I thought at the time, before I knew that betrayal would come from where I least expected it. I spent the last few years improving the property. I planted fruit trees, fixed the roof, and painted the walls. Every improvement I made was with my future in mind, the place where I would spend my final years with peace and dignity. Robert seemed to support my efforts. He called me often, asked how the improvements were going, and told me he was happy to see me enjoying my own space. I trusted him completely. He was my son, the person I had sacrificed my whole life for. Sarah had 2 children, my grandchildren. I adored them and visited them whenever I could in the city. I brought them gifts, spent time with them and told them stories. I felt that finally all my effort had been worth it. I had my own house, a family, and beautiful grandchildren. 6 months ago, Robert started asking me about the country house documents. He said it was important to have everything in order, that at my age I should make sure the papers were well stored. I didn't see any warning signs in those questions. I thought it was genuine concern from a son for his mother. I showed him where I kept the documents and explained how everything was organized. He took pictures of some papers, saying he wanted to have copies just in case. I trusted him without a moment's hesitation. The months following those conversations about the documents passed with apparent normality. I divided my time between the city, where I did some cleaning jobs to stay active and have extra income, and the country house, where I spent the weekends resting from the urban noise. My routine in the city was simple, but it kept me busy. I got up early, prepared my modest breakfast, and went out to work. I cleaned 2 small offices 3 times a week. The money wasn't much, but it was enough for my basic expenses and to treat my grandchildren occasionally. Every Friday afternoon, I took the bus upstate. The trip took almost 3 hours, but I didn't mind. I looked out the window as the city fell behind, and the landscape transformed into green fields, trees, and open sky. That journey was my transition between 2 worlds. Arriving at the country house, I felt like I could breathe deeply. The air was different there, cleaner, fresher. I opened the windows of the house and let the breeze come in, carrying away the tiredness accumulated during the week. It was my sanctuary, my personal retreat. On Sunday afternoons, I returned to the city with regret, but also with renewed energy. That rhythm worked well for me. It kept me connected with my family, especially my grandchildren. But I also had my peaceful space where I could just be myself. Robert visited me in the city about every 2 weeks. He would come to my small apartment, sit at the kitchen table, and we would have coffee together. We talked about his work, the children, and his plans. He worked for a logistics company, in a decent administrative position. During those visits, Robert always asked how I was, if I needed anything, or if I had any health issues. I appreciated his attention. I felt fortunate to have a son who cared about me. I never imagined that behind those questions was a hidden intention. Sarah rarely joined me for those meetings. She always had an excuse: the children, work, social commitments. I didn't insist because I noticed she had never been truly comfortable with me. She came from a different background, had different customs, and I represented a humble past that perhaps embarrassed her. My grandchildren were my joy. Ethan was 8 and Liam was 6. When I saw them, I felt that all my effort had made sense. I bought them candy, told them stories from when their father was a boy, and played with them. They called me Grandma Hortense and ran to hug me every time I arrived. At the country house, I kept everything spotless. I cleaned the house every weekend, watered the plants, and took care of the small garden I had created next to the entrance. Every corner of that place had been worked on with my own hands. I sewed the curtains myself, and I chose the decorations in local markets. Every detail had my personal touch. The neighbors in the area were kind, but we kept a certain distance. The closest country house was about 200 yards away. Mrs. Dolores Williams lived there with her husband. She was my age, 65, and occasionally we exchanged greetings or a few words about the weather or the plants. I was never one to make deep friendships. My life had been too busy working and raising Robert, but I appreciated the tranquility of knowing there were people nearby in case I needed help. Dolores had invited me for coffee a few times, but I always politely declined, preferring my solitude. 3 months ago, Robert started visiting me at the country house too. He would show up unannounced, usually when I was there on weekends. He said he wanted to spend time with me, that he missed the country air. I was happy to have him around, to share that space I loved so much. During those visits, he would walk around the property as if evaluating it. He would ask about the condition of the roof, the pipes, and how much each improvement had cost. I would answer with pride, telling him how much I had invested in making that place a comfortable and safe home. Once, I found him looking at documents on the small desk where I kept my important papers. He said he was just looking for a pen, but I noticed some papers were in a different order. I didn't give it importance at the time. He was my son. I trusted him completely. Sarah accompanied him once. She walked through the house with a critical expression, making comments about how outdated the furniture was, how small everything was. I felt a pang of pain in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to create conflict with my son's wife. That afternoon, while I was preparing coffee for the three of us, I heard Sarah talking to Robert in a low voice in the living room. I couldn't understand everything they were saying, but I caught a few words: value, location, opportunity. I thought they were talking about some business of their own, unrelated to me. The children only came with me to the country house once. It was a beautiful day. They ran around the garden, played under the trees, and got their knees dirty climbing and exploring. I looked at them happily, imagining that maybe someday they would also enjoy that place, that the country house would pass down to the next generations of our family. Robert took a lot of pictures that day, of the house, the land, every angle of the property. He said he wanted to have nice memories of that special place. I posed smiling next to my grandchildren, unaware that those photos would have a completely different purpose. 2 months ago, Robert asked me to give him a copy of the country house keys. He said it was for security, that if something happened to me or I had an emergency, he could get in to help me. It seemed like a reasonable request from a concerned son. I gave him the keys without hesitation. A week after giving him the keys, Robert mentioned that he had been to the country house one weekday to check that everything was okay. He said he had noticed a loose window and had secured it. I thanked him for caring, for looking after my property as if it were his own. What I didn't know then was that that visit hadn't been to help me. Dolores would tell me later that she saw a truck parked in front of my house that day, that she saw people going in and out, and that she saw Robert measuring walls and taking notes. But at that moment, I didn't know any of that. My relationship with Robert seemed closer than ever. We talked on the phone almost every day. He asked me about my health, my work, and my plans. I told him everything, happy to have that connection with my son. I felt blessed that after so many years of sacrifice, we finally had a good relationship. Sarah also started being nicer to me. She called me occasionally, asked how I was, and invited me to dinner at her house. I accepted those invitations gladly, thinking I had finally managed to win her appreciation. How naive I was not to see the signs. The first real sign that something was wrong came 6 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my city apartment resting after cleaning one of the offices. My phone rang, and it was an unknown number. I hesitated to answer, but finally did. It was a man who identified himself as an employee of a notary's office. He asked if I was Hortense Smith, owner of the country house upstate. When I confirmed, he told me they needed to verify some data because there was a request for processing related to my property. He asked if I had initiated any legal or transfer process. I told him no, that I hadn't initiated any proceedings. The man was silent for a moment, and then told me it was strange because they had documents with my signature requesting a property appraisal for a possible sale. I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't signed anything like that. I asked him for more information, but he told me he needed to verify some internal details first and that he would call me back. He never called back. I tried to contact the notary's office using the number they called from, but no one answered. That night I couldn't sleep well, tossing and turning over the issue. The next day, I called Robert going to tell him about the strange call. He seemed surprised and worried. He told me it was probably a scam, that there were many con artists trying to trick elderly people. He advised me not to answer calls from unknown numbers, and that if it happened again, to call him immediately. His words reassured me. What he said made sense. I had heard stories of scammers who called older people pretending to be authorities or institutional employees. I decided to follow his advice and forget about the matter, but a part of me remained uneasy. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected visit at my apartment. It was a man in his 50s, well-dressed, who introduced himself as a representative of a real estate company. He told me they were interested in buying properties in the area where my country house was and wanted to make me an offer. I clearly told him that my country house was not for sale, that it was my home, and I had no intention of selling it. The man insisted. He told me they had a very interested client willing to pay a good price. He showed me papers with figures. He spoke of tens of thousands of dollars that sounded tempting, but I stood firm. I asked him to leave and told him not to bother me again. Before leaving, he looked at me with a strange expression and said something that stuck with me. His client had already made previous investments related to that property and expected to finalize the purchase soon. I didn't understand what he meant by that. That night I called Robert again. I told him about the visit from the real estate man. This time I noticed something different in his voice. It took him a few seconds to respond, and when he did, his tone sounded tense. He told me it was very strange, that surely someone was trying to take advantage of me. He suggested that, for security, it would be good for him to review all my property documents. He said he wanted to make sure everything was in order, that there were no irregularities that could be exploited by unscrupulous people. I agreed, seeing no reason to distrust him. The following weekend, Robert came to the country house. I was there as usual. He arrived alone, without Sarah or the children. He brought a large folder and asked for all the documents related to the property. He sat at the dining room table and began to review every paper carefully. I prepared lunch while he worked. From time to time, I looked at him from the kitchen and saw him concentrated, taking notes in a notebook and making brief phone calls. I felt calm having him there, thinking my son was protecting my interests. After lunch, Robert told me that everything seemed to be in order, but that he had noticed some documents needed to be updated. He told me about changes in laws, new legal requirements, and the importance of having everything perfectly registered. I didn't understand much about those things, so I trusted his judgment. He asked permission to take some original documents to the city. He said a lawyer friend of his could review them and make sure everything was in accordance with the new regulations. I gave him permission. He was my son, the man I had raised, the person I trusted most in this world. A week later, Robert brought the documents back to me. He explained that the lawyer had made some minor corrections, that everything was perfect now. He showed me papers with official stamps, with signatures I didn't recognize. He told me they were necessary certifications, updates to the registration. I signed where he indicated. I signed without reading completely, without understanding all the legal terms, trusting that my son would never hurt me. Those signatures I put that day, on documents I didn't fully understand, would later be used in ways I never imagined. The following week, Robert was more present than ever. He visited me constantly, called me every day, and was extremely attentive. I was happy with that closeness, feeling that I finally had the affectionate son I had always dreamed of having. Sarah also changed her attitude. She invited me to her house, cooked for me, and included me in family plans. The children spent more time with me. I felt like part of a united family, something I had longed for years. I didn't see that all that sudden affection had a calculated purpose. A month ago, Robert proposed something that at the time seemed to me like another show of his affection. He told me he had talked to Sarah, and they had decided that I shouldn't continue working cleaning offices at my age. They wanted me to retire completely and enjoy my last years without worries. He explained that they could help me financially if necessary, that I shouldn't keep wearing out my health for a few dollars. I was touched by his proposal. I felt valued, cared for, and loved. I accepted his suggestion and quit my cleaning jobs. With more free time, I started spending more days at the country house. Not just on weekends, but also some weekdays. I enjoyed the tranquility, the garden, and my plants. I felt at peace, without imagining that this peace was about to be broken in the most brutal way. 3 weeks ago, I decided to go to the country house on a Wednesday. I usually went on Fridays, but that particular day I felt tired of the city noise and wanted to leave earlier. I took the bus early in the morning. I arrived before noon. As I walked from where the bus dropped me off to my property, I saw a car parked near my gate. I didn't recognize it. It seemed strange to me because usually there were no vehicles in that area during the week. I walked slower, with some caution. When I got closer, I saw it was a rental car, one of those used by rental companies. No one was inside. I looked towards my house and noticed that the door was ajar. My heart started beating faster. Someone was inside my house without my permission. I entered silently. I heard voices inside. One was Robert's voice. I didn't recognize the other. They were talking in the living room, discussing measurements, spaces, and remodeling possibilities. I stayed hidden in the hallway, listening. The man accompanying Robert spoke enthusiastically about the property's potential. He said that with some renovations, the place could sell for an excellent price. He mentioned specific figures, $30,000, maybe $40,000 if the right improvements were made. My blood ran cold hearing those words. Robert responded calmly, as if discussing something completely normal. He told the man that he had already spoken with some contacts about potential buyers, that the legal process was practically resolved, that only some final details were missing. He spoke of my property as if it were already his. I came out of my hiding place in the hallway. The two men froze when they saw me. All the color drained from Robert's face. The other man, who was carrying a briefcase and a folder with blueprints, looked at me confused. There was a heavy silence that seemed to last an eternity. I asked Robert what all that meant. My voice came out shaky but firm. He tried to smile, tried to act natural. He told me it was a surprise, that he was evaluating options to help me, that he had thought maybe I would want to sell the country house and move closer to them in the city. I told him I had never mentioned wanting to sell, that this country house was my home, my refuge, the result of decades of work. Robert continued with his excuses. He said he was just exploring possibilities, that he wanted to know how much the property was worth in case I ever changed my mind. His words sounded hollow, false. The other man quickly introduced himself as a real estate appraiser. He nervously handed me his professional card. He said Robert had contacted him for an informal appraisal, that there was nothing official yet, that they were just looking at options. I didn't believe a word of it. I asked both of them to leave my house immediately. The appraiser hastily gathered his things and practically ran out to his car. Robert stayed, trying to talk to me, but I didn't want to listen. I told him I needed to be alone, that he had disappointed me deeply. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed seated in the living room, looking at the walls I had painted with my own hands, the furniture I had bought with so much sacrifice. I was trying to understand what was really happening. My son, my only son, was planning something behind my back. The next day, I returned to the city. I needed to think. I needed to understand the magnitude of what I had discovered. Robert called me several times, but I didn't answer. Sarah also tried to contact me. I let all the calls go to voicemail. During the following days, I began to remember details that previously seemed insignificant. The constant questions about the documents, the sudden interest in spending time with me, the frequent visits to the country house. Everything began to make sense, forming a pattern that terrified me. I decided to go talk to Mrs. Williams, my neighbour at the country house. I took the bus and went directly to her house. She received me with surprise, but kindly. I asked her if she had seen anything strange on my property during the last few weeks, especially when I wasn't there. Dolores hesitated for a moment before answering. Finally, she told me yes, that she had seen Robert arrive several times during the week with different people. She saw cars parked, people going in and out, and even a construction company truck once. She had thought I was aware of all that. She also told me that 2 weeks ago she saw Robert and Sarah measuring the outdoor land, that she heard Sarah talking on the phone about planning a complete remodel. Dolores thought maybe I had decided to make improvements to the property with the help of my family. She never imagined that I knew nothing. I thanked her for her honesty and asked her to let me know immediately if she saw anything else. She gave me her phone number and told me I could count on her for whatever I needed. She looked at me with pity and concern, as if she understood what was happening without me having to explain it. I returned to my apartment in the city with a broken heart. The betrayal was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just a fleeting idea of Robert's. It was an elaborate plan that had been in motion for months. He had taken the time to bring in appraisers, plan renovations, and look for buyers. That afternoon, I finally answered one of Robert's calls. His voice sounded anxious. He apologized. He told me he had handled everything badly, that his intentions were good. He tried to explain that he just wanted to secure my future, that he thought selling the country house and having the money in the bank would be better for me at my age. I asked him directly if he had done anything with the documents I gave him. There was a long silence. Then he told me that he had updated some records, as he had explained, that everything was legal. But his tone of voice told me there was something more, something he wasn't telling me. I demanded that he return all my original documents. He told me he had them stored in a safe place, that he could bring them to me whenever I wanted. I told him I wanted them back immediately. We agreed to meet the next day at my apartment. Robert arrived the next day in the afternoon. He brought a folder with documents. He handed them to me in silence. I reviewed them one by one, but the truth is I didn't completely understand what I was looking at. They were papers full of legal terms, stamps, and signatures. Some looked different from how I remembered them. I asked him to leave. Before leaving, he tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I saw tears in his eyes, but they didn't move me. He had lost my trust. He had broken something that might never be repaired. I closed the door behind him and stayed alone with the documents. During the following days, I tried to understand the papers. There was one in particular that worried me. It was a power of attorney document that I had signed, but upon reading it more carefully, I realized that it granted very broad permissions. Permissions to carry out procedures, to represent me in legal matters, to make decisions about the property. I vaguely remembered signing that paper. Robert had told me it was just a formality, an update required by changes in the laws. I had trusted his word. Now I saw that this document could be used in ways I had never imagined. I decided to seek professional help. I needed to know exactly what all those papers meant, what I had authorized without realizing it. I searched the internet for lawyers who offered free or affordable consultations. I found an office that had services for low-income people. I called and asked for an appointment. They gave me a slot for the following week. While waiting for that date, I kept turning everything over in my head. The days felt endless. I couldn't sleep well. I had no appetite. The anguish consumed me, thinking about what else I might discover. Robert tried to visit me several times, but I wouldn't open the door. Sarah came once and knocked insistently. She shouted from outside that they needed to talk to me, that everything was a misunderstanding. I stayed silent inside my apartment until she left. The children sent me drawings by mail. Ethan wrote a note saying he missed me. Liam drew a house with flowers and put my name underneath. Those gestures broke my heart. I loved my grandchildren deeply, but their parents were trying to destroy my life. The day of the appointment with the lawyer finally arrived. His name was Andrew Jones, and he had a small but tidy office. He was a man in his 50s, serious-looking but kind. He offered me coffee and asked me to tell him my situation. I told Andrew Jones the entire story. From the beginning, from the strange calls from the notary's office, through the appraiser's visit, to finding Robert with the evaluator at my country house. I showed him all the documents I had. He reviewed them carefully, taking notes and asking specific questions about dates and circumstances. As I spoke, I could see his expression growing more serious. When I finished telling him everything, he took a deep breath and looked at me with a mixture of compassion and concern. He told me the situation was delicate, that there were signs they might be preparing for asset fraud. Andrew explained that the power of attorney document I had signed gave Robert very broad powers over my property. With that paper, he could carry out procedures without my presence, even initiate sales processes if he combined it with other documents. He told me it was common for unscrupulous people to use these types of authorizations to strip older adults of their assets. I felt the floor move beneath my feet. I asked him if it was possible that Robert was really planning to take my country house from me. Andrew told me that based on what I had told him and the documents he had reviewed, it was a very real possibility. He advised me to act quickly to protect my assets. He explained that we needed to immediately revoke that power of attorney. He also suggested we register a cautionary notice in the public property registry, indicating that I, as the owner, did not authorize any transaction without my physical presence and my signature before a notary. This would hinder any attempt at a fraudulent sale. I asked him how much his services would cost. I had some savings, but not much. Andrew looked at me kindly and told me that these kinds of cases deeply outraged him. He offered to charge me a minimal fee, just enough to cover the expenses of the procedures, $200 in total for the entire process. I accepted gratefully. We signed a simple contract for legal services. He told me he would start working immediately on revoking the power of attorney and registering the cautionary notice. He asked me not to say anything to Robert yet about this legal consultation. It was important that he didn't know I was taking action. Andrew also suggested that I try to obtain more information about what exactly Robert had been doing. He recommended I talk to the neighbors, check if there were other documents I didn't know about, and be alert to any suspicious movement. He gave me his personal number and told me to call him at any hour if I discovered anything important. I left that office feeling a little stronger. For the first time in weeks, I felt I wasn't completely alone, that there was someone on my side who understood the seriousness of the situation. I had an action plan, concrete steps to follow to protect myself. The following days were spent in silent work. Andrew kept me informed of the progress. The revocation of the power of attorney was processed quickly. The cautionary notice in the property registry took a little longer, but was finally completed as well. Legally, it was now much more difficult for someone to do something with my country house without my knowledge. Meanwhile, I started investigating on my own. I spoke with Dolores again. I explained more openly what was happening. She was supportive and told me more details she had observed. She told me that she once saw Sarah taking photographs of the entire property, including the inside of the house. Dolores also mentioned that she heard Robert but talking on the phone in my country house garden about 3 weeks ago. He was talking about deadlines, about cut-off dates, about having everything ready before I realized it. Those words confirmed there was a concrete plan with established timelines. I asked Dolores that if she saw anything suspicious again, to document it, to take photos if possible, to write down dates and times. She agreed to help me. She said we were older women and we should look out for each other. I felt grateful to have at least one ally in this horrible situation. Robert kept calling me. I answered occasionally so as not to raise suspicion, but I kept the conversations brief. He insisted that we see each other, that we talk calmly. He told me he missed me, that the children missed me. He used every emotional resource he knew to soften me up. Sarah also intensified her attempts to contact me. She sent me long messages talking about misunderstandings, about the importance of family. She told me that Robert only wanted the best for me, that I was interpreting everything wrong. Her words were full of manipulation, trying to make me doubt my own perception. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a woman who identified herself as an employee of a moving company. She asked me if I confirmed the service scheduled for the following week. I told her I hadn't requested any moving service. She was confused and read me an address. It was the address of my country house. I asked for more details. She told me they had an order signed by Robert Smith to remove furniture and belongings from that address. The scheduled date was for 5 days from then. I firmly told her to cancel that service, that it was a mistake, that no one had authorization to move anything from that property. The woman told me she needed to speak with whoever made the reservation because a deposit had already been paid. She gave me the contact number they had registered. It was Robert's phone number. I hung up the call, and my entire body started shaking. The plan was further along than I thought. I immediately called Andrew. I told him about the call from the moving company. He was alarmed and told me this confirmed his worst suspicions. He advised me to go to the country house as soon as possible and stay there, not to leave it alone for a moment until we completely resolved the legal situation. He also suggested I report this to the police as attempted trespass and theft. He explained that although Robert was my son, what he was doing constituted a crime. I hesitated about involving the authorities. He was my son, despite everything. Andrew told me firmly that being family didn't give him the right to rob me. That night, I packed a small suitcase and prepared to go to the country house the next day and stay there for as long as necessary. I wasn't going to allow them to take what had taken me a lifetime to achieve. For the first time in weeks, I felt something akin to determination. Before going to sleep, I reviewed all the documents I had again. I searched through my old papers and found receipts for all the payments I had made for the country house over the years. The receipts for the initial loan, the invoices for the improvements, the proof of taxes paid. Everything was in my name. Everything proved that property was mine. I prepared a folder with all that documentation. I kept it along with the papers Andrew had given me about the revocation of the power of attorney and the cautionary notice. That folder was my shield, my legal protection against any attempt to strip me of what was mine. The next morning I took the bus upstate. During the trip, my mind wouldn't stop working. I thought about all the years I had dedicated to raising Robert, the sacrifices I had made for him. I remembered the sleepless nights when he was a baby, the extra jobs to pay for his studies, the times I went hungry so he would have food. I wondered at what point everything had gone wrong. At what moment my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle to getting money? The answer probably had to do with Sarah, with her ambitions, with her way of valuing things only for their material price. I arrived at the country house at noon. Everything seemed quiet. I opened the door and went inside. I checked every room looking for signs that someone had been there. Everything seemed to be in its place, but I noticed small differences in details. A drawer that I always left completely closed was slightly open. Some photos on the shelf were in a different order. I sat on the living room sofa and looked around. Every object in that house had a story. The lamp on the side table I bought at a market 15 years ago, haggling the price for half an hour until I got a discount of $10. I sewed the curtains during an entire winter, taking advantage of free afternoons after work. I decided to check more thoroughly. I went to the desk where I kept important documents. I opened all the drawers methodically. At the bottom of the last drawer, under some old invoices, I found something that chilled my blood. It was a copy of a sales contract. A contract where my country house was being sold for the sum of $35,000. The document was dated 2 weeks ago. My name appeared in the seller section, with a signature that looked like mine, but which I didn't remember putting there. In the buyer section, there was a name I didn't know, a generic named company. The signing witnesses were Robert and Sarah. My hands trembled as I held that paper. This was the full plan. They didn't just want to appraise the property or think about selling it in the future. They had already prepared a sales contract. They had already forged my signature. They already had a fictitious buyer, probably someone working with them to make the transaction look legitimate. I took photographs of the document with my phone. I immediately called Andrew. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I had found. I heard his strained breathing on the other end of the line. He told me that was evidence of documentary fraud, that it was a serious crime. He asked me not to touch that document, to leave it exactly where I found it. Andrew explained that we needed to act with great caution. He told me that this contract probably hadn't been executed yet because the cautionary notice we registered had blocked it. When they tried to do the final procedure at the property registry, they must have encountered the warning we had placed. That explained why they had scheduled the move. If they couldn't sell the property legally because I had blocked the registry, their alternative plan was simply to empty the house and take physical possession of the place. Once they had control of the property, it would be harder for me to recover it, especially if they destroyed or hid the documents that proved my ownership. Andrew told me that now it was absolutely necessary to file a formal report with the police. He explained that with that fake contract as evidence, we had enough proof of attempted fraud. He gave me precise instructions on how to proceed. He told me not to leave the country house, that he would come personally the next day with a police officer. That night was one of the longest of my life. Every noise startled me. Every shadow I saw by the window made me fear that it was Robert and Sarah arriving to confront me. I locked all the doors, I checked the windows, I stayed awake on the sofa with all the lights on. I thought a lot that night. I thought about how I had reached this point. A 68-year-old woman, alone in her house, afraid of her own son. I wondered if I had been a bad mother, if I had made such serious mistakes that they had turned Robert into someone capable of doing this to me. But then I remembered all the values I tried to teach him. Honesty, respect, gratitude. I taught him by example, working honestly my entire life, never taking what wasn't mine, treating everyone with dignity. If he had chosen to ignore those teachings, that responsibility was his, not mine. At dawn, I heard a car approaching. My heart raced. I looked out the window and saw it was Dolores in her old pickup truck. She got out with a basket in her hands. I knocked on the door from inside and opened it. She had brought fresh bread, coffee, and fruit. She told me she imagined I hadn't slept well and wanted to make sure I had something for breakfast. We sat in the kitchen, and I told her about the fake contract I had found. Dolores shook her head sadly. She told me she had seen so many similar cases in her life. Children taking advantage of older parents, seeing them as sources of money instead of people who deserved respect and care. She asked me if I was afraid of what would come next. I told her the truth. Yes, I was afraid. Afraid of publicly confronting my son, afraid of losing contact with my grandchildren, afraid of being completely alone. But I was more afraid of being left with nothing, without a home, without dignity, after a lifetime of honest work. Dolores took my hands across the table. She told me she would be with me in whatever I needed, that she wouldn't leave me alone in this process. She told me that she too had gone through difficult situations with her family, that she understood how painful it was when those who should protect you are the ones who hurt you. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, Andrew arrived accompanied by a police officer. The officer was a man in his 40s, professional looking. Andrew made the formal introductions. The officer asked me to tell him the whole story from the beginning. I sat with them in the living room and narrated every detail again. I showed the fake contract I had found. The officer examined it carefully, took photographs, and placed it in an evidence bag. He asked me specific questions about the signatures, about when I supposedly signed it, about whether I recognized the witnesses. I answered every question as accurately as possible. The officer explained to me that this constituted forgery of documents and attempted asset fraud. He told me they could open a formal investigation, but that I had to be prepared for the consequences. It meant Robert would be questioned, possibly facing criminal charges. I told him I understood that despite the pain it caused me, I needed to protect what was mine. Andrew intervened, explaining all the preventive measures we had taken. The officer nodded approvingly. He said we had acted correctly by registering the cautionary notice, that this had likely prevented the fraud from being completed. He congratulated me for seeking legal help in time. After taking my formal statement, the officer told me that the moving company that had been hired would also be contacted. They would have to testify about who made the reservation and provide related documents. All of that would serve as additional evidence of the plan Robert and Sarah had drawn up. Before leaving, the officer gave me some security recommendations. He suggested I change the locks on the house immediately, as Robert had copies of the keys. He told me to document everything, to take photographs of my belongings, and to keep a record of any attempt at contact or intimidation. Andrew stayed a little longer after the officer left. He explained the next steps in the legal process. There would be an investigation that could take a few weeks. During that time, I needed to stay firm, not let myself be convinced by Robert if he tried to manipulate me emotionally. He reminded me that what he had done was serious, criminal, not just a family mistake. That afternoon, I hired a local locksmith whom Dolores recommended. He came and changed all the locks on the house. He gave me 3 sets of new keys. I kept one with me, gave another to Dolores in case I needed help in an emergency, and kept the third in a safe place inside the house. While the locksmith was working, I received calls from Robert. I didn't answer. Messages from Sarah also arrived. I read them, but didn't reply. They said they were worried because they couldn't locate me, that they needed to talk urgently. I knew they had probably tried to come to the country house and found that their keys no longer worked. That night, Dolores insisted that I sleep at her house. She told me it wasn't good for me to be alone yet, that the next day I could return to my country house with more peace of mind. I gratefully accepted her offer. I needed the comfort of not being completely alone at that moment. At Dolores's house, while we ate a hot soup she prepared, she told me about her own life. She spoke of the difficulties she had faced, the losses, the betrayals. She told me that life had taught her that true strength doesn't come from not falling, but from getting up every time we fall. The next morning, I returned to my country house early. I needed to be there, to feel like I was regaining control of my space. Dolores accompanied me and stayed with me during the morning. We made coffee and sat on the porch, looking at the garden I had cultivated with so much love for years. Around noon, we heard the sound of an engine approaching. It was a large truck, exactly as the woman from the moving company had described. Robert's car was driving behind it. My heart started pounding, but I held firm. Dolores squeezed my hand in support. Robert got out of the car first. Sarah got out of the passenger side. Both walked towards my property gate with determined expressions. It was then that they saw me and Dolores sitting on the porch. The surprise on their faces was evident. They clearly didn't expect to find me there. Robert tried to smile, tried to act natural. He called out to me in a voice that was meant to sound affectionate, but I could detect the tension behind every word. He said he had come to help me with some things in the house, that he had hired the truck to take away furniture that needed repair. I slowly stood up. I walked toward the gate, but I didn't open it. I looked at both of them directly in the eyes and told them I knew exactly what they had been planning. I took out my phone and showed them the photograph of the fake sales contract I had found. I saw the color drain from their faces. Sarah was the first to react. She started yelling that I was misinterpreting everything, that the document was just a draft, that they never intended to execute it without my consent. Her words tumbled out, desperate. Robert tried to calm her down, but she continued with increasingly elaborate excuses. I told Robert that I had spoken with a lawyer and the police, that there was enough evidence of document forgery and attempted fraud, and that everything was being formally investigated. I saw real panic in his eyes for the first time. He tried to move closer to the gate, but I took a step back. The drivers of the moving truck got out of their vehicle, confused by the scene unfolding. One of them asked if they should start loading. I told them in a clear, strong voice that they did not have my authorization to take anything from my property, that if they touched anything, they would be participating in a theft. Robert tried to talk to the truck workers, but Dolores intervened. She approached the gate and told the men that she was a witness, that the property owner had not authorized any moving service, and that the best thing they could do was leave before getting involved in legal trouble. The workers looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. One of them took out a paper and told Robert that they needed a clear resolution because they didn't want problems. Robert tried to convince them that it was all a family misunderstanding, but the men were already climbing back into the truck. Sarah started yelling louder. She accused me of being an ungrateful old woman, of not valuing everything they had done for me. She said the country house was too much for me alone, that at my age I couldn't maintain it, and that they only wanted what was best for me. Every word she spoke revealed her true nature. The mask of kindness had completely fallen away. At that moment, another car arrived. It was Andrew, my lawyer. He got out with a briefcase under his arm and walked toward us with a serious expression. He formally introduced himself to Robert and Sarah as my legal representative. He informed them that there was a criminal investigation underway, and that any attempt at intimidation or accessing the property without authorization would be immediately reported to the authorities. Robert tried to speak with Andrew. He tried to explain his version of events. Andrew interrupted him in a firm voice. He told him it was inappropriate for them to talk at that moment, that if he had something to say, he should do it through his own lawyer during the official investigation. He extended his business card, so Robert would have the contact information. Sarah kept yelling, but now her screams were more about money. She said they had invested time and resources in planning improvements for the property, that they had spent money on appraisals and procedures, that I owed them compensation for those expenses. Her greed was exposed with every word. Andrew took some documents from his briefcase. He showed Robert the official revocation of the power of attorney that I had previously signed. He also showed him the registration of the cautionary notice on the property. He explained that any document he had in his possession related to the country house no longer had legal validity, that I had taken all necessary steps to protect my assets. The moving truck left at that moment, leaving Robert and Sarah alone in front of my gate. Robert tried one last time to speak to me directly. His voice now sounded different, pleading. He told me I was his mother, that I couldn't do this to him, that I should think about my grandchildren, about the family. I felt a pang of pain in my heart, hearing my grandchildren mentioned. I missed them terribly, but I held firm. I told Robert that he had chosen to betray me, that he had planned to steal what took me a lifetime to achieve, that the consequences of his actions were his responsibility, not mine. Sarah tried to move closer, pushing the gate, but Dolores stepped in front of her. She told Sarah in a calm but firm voice to immediately leave the property, that there were witnesses to everything that was happening, that every word they spoke could be used against them during the investigation. At that moment, a police cruiser arrived. The officer who had taken my statement the day before got out of the vehicle. He approached the group and asked if there was a problem. Andrew briefly explained the situation. The officer looked at Robert and Sarah and asked them to identify themselves. Robert took out his ID with trembling hands. The officer reviewed his identity and made a note of his information. He asked him what he was doing there with a moving truck. Robert tried to explain that it had been a misunderstanding, that he only wanted to help his mother. The officer interrupted him and told him he was already aware of the ongoing investigation. The officer formally warned Robert and Sarah that they should not approach the property again without explicit authorization from the owner, that any violation of this warning would result in immediate arrest. He told them they needed to leave the premises right then. Robert nodded silently, defeated. Before leaving, Robert looked at me one last time. There were tears in his eyes, but I didn't know if they were from genuine remorse or simply from frustration at being discovered. I wanted to believe that something of the child I raised remained, but that child seemed to have disappeared a long time ago. Sarah got into the car furious, slamming the door. She yelled something from inside that I couldn't completely hear. Robert walked slowly to the car, got in, and drove away. I watched them drive down the dirt road until they disappeared among the trees. The silence that followed was profound. I stood by the gate, feeling all the accumulated tension beginning to release from my body. My legs were shaking. Dolores held my arm and helped me walk back to the porch. I sat in the same chair I had been in before, but now I felt completely different. The officer approached and asked if I was okay. I told him yes, that I was in shock, but okay. He reminded me that I should call him if Robert or Sarah tried to contact me again or approach the property. He told me the case was still under investigation and that I would probably have to give another statement in a few days. Andrew sat next to me. He explained that what had just happened was very important, that we had witnesses, including the police officer, that Robert had arrived with a moving truck trying to take my belongings without authorization, that this greatly strengthened the case for attempted theft. The following days were strange. On the one hand, I felt enormous relief at having faced the situation, at having protected what was mine. On the other hand, the pain of family betrayal accompanied me at every moment. I spent the nights at my country house, now truly feeling it was my safe haven. Dolores became a true friend during that time. She came to visit me every day. We shared coffee and talked about life. She told me stories of her youth, of the difficulties she had faced. I also shared with her memories I had kept for years. That friendship that blossomed in the middle of the crisis was an unexpected gift. Andrew kept me informed about the progress of the investigation. The police had questioned Robert and Sarah. They had also spoken with the moving company, the appraiser who was at my house, and the notary's office, where they tried to register the fake contract. Every testimony confirmed the plan they had devised to strip me of my property. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the gate, Andrew summoned me to his office. He told me there was important news. The district attorney had decided to formally proceed with charges against Robert and Sarah for document forgery and attempted asset fraud. They faced the possibility of prison sentences if they were found guilty. He asked me how I felt about it. I told him the truth. I felt devastated, but also liberated. Devastated because he was my son, because I had dreamed of an old age surrounded by loving family. Liberated because I had finally set boundaries. I had defended my dignity. I had said stop. Andrew explained that there was a possibility of reaching a settlement before going to trial. If Robert and Sarah pleaded guilty, returned any documents they had, signed a legal commitment not to approach me or my property, and compensated me for legal expenses, the prosecution might consider lesser sentences or alternatives to prison. He asked me if I would be willing to consider that option. I thought for several minutes before responding. I said yes, that despite everything, I didn't want to see my son in prison. But I had conditions. I wanted them to publicly admit what they had done. I wanted my grandchildren to know the truth when they were older. And I wanted an absolute guarantee that they would never try anything similar again. The negotiations took several more weeks. Robert and Sarah's lawyer tried to minimize the facts, but the evidence was too compelling. They finally reached an agreement. They admitted their guilt, committed to staying away, and compensated me with $3,000 for the legal expenses and the damage caused. Part of the agreement included Robert writing a letter explaining his actions. When I received that letter, I sat on my porch and read it with tears running down my cheeks. He admitted that he had been blinded by greed, influenced by Sarah, and pressured by debts I didn't know about. He apologized, although he admitted he didn't deserve to be forgiven. I didn't respond to that letter. I wasn't ready yet. The pain was too recent, too deep. I put the letter in a drawer, thinking that perhaps someday I could read it without feeling it pierce my heart. But that day hadn't arrived yet. Months passed. I dedicated myself to healing, to rebuilding my life. Dolores and I became inseparable. She taught me to knit, something I had never had time to learn. I taught her my cooking recipes, the ones I had perfected over decades. We accompanied each other in the solitude we both shared. I started participating in local community activities. There was a group of older women who met on Tuesdays at the church in the nearby town. I went once out of curiosity and found a group of strong women. You could tell they had been through their own battles. They accepted me immediately. They made me feel part of something bigger. One of those women, Frances, had a story similar to mine. Her daughter had tried to have her declared mentally incompetent to take control of her finances. Another, Eleanor, had been stripped of her house by a nephew, but managed to recover it after a 2-year legal battle. Their stories showed me that I wasn't alone, that this type of family abuse was more common than I imagined. Together, we started organizing informational talks in the community. We invited Andrew to come and explain the rights of older people, how to protect themselves against family abuse, what warning signs they should look for. The talks were packed with people. There was a huge need for this information. I realized that my painful experience could be used to help other people. I shared my story publicly for the first time in one of those talks. It was difficult. I cried as I spoke, but I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Several women approached me afterward to thank me, to tell me that my bravery had inspired them. 6 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Ethan, my oldest grandson. He was only 8 years old, but his words were written carefully. He told me he missed me, that he didn't completely understand why we weren't seeing each other, but that he knew adults sometimes had complicated problems. He sent me a drawing of my country house with flowers around it. I cried when I read that letter. My grandchildren were not to blame for their parents' actions. They deserved to know their grandmother. I wrote him back with a letter of my own, explaining in an age-appropriate way that sometimes families go through difficult times, but that my love for him and his sister would never change. I started corresponding with my grandchildren through letters. I didn't speak ill of their parents in those letters. I didn't burden them with the details of the betrayal. I just shared stories, sent them drawings, and told them how much I loved them. It was a small but significant connection, a light in the midst of the pain. My life found a new rhythm. I spent most of my time at my country house, enjoying the peace that had cost me so much to achieve. Occasionally, I would go to the city to visit some friends I had made in the church group. I had a simple but satisfying routine. I improved the garden, planted more flowers, and created a small vegetable patch. Every morning I got up early, had my coffee on the porch watching the sunrise, and was grateful to have that place, to have had the strength to defend it. The country house was no longer just a property. It was the symbol of my recovered dignity. 1 year after everything that happened, Andrew visited me with final news. The legal case had closed completely. Robert and Sarah had complied with all the terms of the agreement. They were legally prohibited from approaching me or my property for 5 years. If they violated that order, they would immediately face criminal charges. I asked Andrew how he felt about the result. He told me he was satisfied. We had managed to protect my assets, establish clear consequences for those who tried to take advantage of me, and create a precedent that could help others in similar situations. He told me I had been brave, that many people in my situation simply gave up. That night, I sat on my sofa, the same sofa that Robert and Sarah had tried to take that terrible day. I looked around my living room, at the furniture I had chosen carefully, at the photographs on the walls, at the curtains I had sewed myself. Everything was in its place. Everything was mine. No one had taken it from me. I thought about the journey I had traveled. From a poor child in a small town, to a struggling single mother, to an older woman who defended her dignity against her own family. Each stage had its challenges, its pains, its lessons. But I had survived them all. I had stood my ground. I understood something important that night. My worth as a person never depended on how much money I had, or whether my family appreciated me, or whether I met the expectations of others. My worth came from within, from the decisions I made every day, from the way I faced difficulties, from my ability to maintain my integrity even when it was hard. At 68 years old, I had finally learned to put myself first without feeling guilty. I had learned that setting boundaries was not selfishness, but survival. I had learned that true love never asks you to sacrifice your dignity or your security. If I could talk to other women my age who are going through similar situations, I would tell them this: it is never too late to defend yourself. No matter who the person trying to hurt you is, even if it is family, you have the right to protect what is yours. You have the right to live your final years in peace, with dignity, surrounded by people who genuinely value you. I would tell them to seek help, not to be afraid to speak up, that there are professionals and communities willing to support them, to document everything, to trust their instincts when something doesn't feel right. That real family love never comes with manipulation or deception. As the sun set that day, painting the sky with colors, I was home.